Hello, Bruno. Welcome. I am so happy to have this opportunity to connect with you. And joining us is Jasmine Gota as well, who you've now met via our email correspondence. I am really pleased that we have this chance to connect. We first started communicating in June. You signed up for our newsletter, and I wrote back to you to thank you. And then you wrote back about paradoxical thinking. And that's kind of what got us started in learning about this concept that I had not been aware of before. And I am really pleased to have this opportunity to get more of your perspective on what this idea of paradoxical thinking is about. So we have some questions that we'll pose to you, but before we get started, it'd be great to hear, like, how did you come to sign up for our newsletter, and what is, just a little bit more about you and your background. And we'll get to the paradoxical thinking part a little bit more after, but just a little intro about you too.
Okay. Well, firstly, thank you, Sandy, for this opportunity. It's actually an honor and a privilege to be able to do this. So in terms of my background, I'm a retired science teacher. I'm an animator, a puppeteer, mime artist. Actually, I'll just put up some pictures to show you, give you an idea of some of the creative things that I've been doing. So as I said, I'm a science teacher, but I'm also an animator, and I've made animated educational films. And there's a couple there. There's Food Chain and Balanced. Balanced actually is a film about the need to have both hemispheres in balance. So that's one thing. I'm also a puppeteer, or have been a puppeteer and a puppet maker. I've been an actor, a dancer, and a mime artist. So basically, all of these areas have actually required me to think paradoxically. And in the early days, I was using paradoxical thinking, I would say, knowingly and unknowingly. But in the early days, those creative activities were really in an unknowingly fashion, if you like. So that's some of my background. I used paradoxical thinking in my teaching as well with my students. So with regards to why I signed up to The World as It Could Be, which I think is a great title, I'm currently working on a sci-fi screenplay called Rewired, which is about a guilt-ridden neuroscientist that discovers her nanobot, meant to cure mental illness, is being used by corporations' AI to control human evolution. And it includes or incorporates my ideas about paradoxical thinking. In this story, there's a community of people with different religions and beliefs and cultures, and I needed some kind of document or guiding principles for them to use. And I went in search on the internet, and I found your website, and came across the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I think is fantastic, and that is now their guiding document. So thank you for that. And then I became interested in you and what your work. I was impressed with what I saw on your website. So I signed up. So thank you.
Well, great. And I'm so glad that we could provide this framework for the work, for the video work, for the film work. All right, well, so let's get going about this paradoxical thinking. How and when did you first learn about it?
First year university psychology, I was doing my teacher training, and I learned that the two hemispheres had opposite traits, which for me blew my mind. I thought, really? And that started me on a 45-year interest in the brain, neuroscience, and just continually keeping up with it. It wasn't until 2011 that I came across this book, which is the book by Dr. Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, where he explores the role of the brain's hemispheres in shaping our culture and understanding of the world. and he talks about the paradoxical nature of the brain. And it got me thinking about paradoxes and the paradoxical nature of the brain. And I started doing some research, and I came across paradoxical thinking, which fascinated me. And then I realized that that's actually, I now had the terminology to use to explain what I was doing, which was great. So that's where that started. And then I got fascinated by how I could actually give that to others because it was so useful for me. And I'd like to actually show you a short video, and it's by the California neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
No.
He does research on split brain patients. But this video, it's just 2 minutes. It highlights the differences between the two hemispheres. So I'll just show you that. Sharing. Okay, so this is a split brain with one half atheist and the other half theist.
Now let's get to the neurology, and one group of patients we have studied is split brain patients or commissurotomy patients. These are people whose corpus callosum has been cut, and anterior commissure and massa intermedia whenever encountered. So essentially you're doing a karate chop right through the head and creating two human beings in one body, in one skull, two spheres of consciousness. Now, many experiments have been done on these people, and I asked myself a very simple question. Okay, you've created two people here. What about their personalities? Do they have different personalities? What about their aesthetic preferences? Does one like blondes and the other like brunettes, for example? One like chocolate and the other like vanilla? What happens? So we tried these experiments, and what we did was we had to first train the right hemisphere to communicate with us. In fact, the right hemisphere can read simple commands, simple words, simple sentences, and then you ask a question and say, point to a box, yes, no, I don't know, because it can't talk. The right hemisphere cannot talk, but it can comprehend simple semantics, simple questions. The left hemisphere, of course, can talk, so you can present boxes, yes, no, I don't know. So we asked, for example, are you at Caltech? And the right hemisphere pointed to yes. Are you on the moon? It said no. Are you in California? It said yes. Are you asleep? It said no. Then I said, are you a woman? And the patient was male. And he pointed to yes. And then started chuckling and laughing. So at least the right hemisphere has a sense of humor. Okay. Okay, so now comes the big question. What if you ask, do you believe in God? So I said, do you believe in God? And the right hemisphere went straight to yes. Right? Asked the same question to the left hemisphere, yes, no, I don't know. It went to no. Right? So here's a human being whose right hemisphere is an atheist, and left hemisphere, on the other hand, believes in God. And this finding should have sent a tsunami through the theological community, but barely produced a ripple, because it raises all kinds of profound theological questions. If this person dies, what happens? Does one hemisphere go to heaven and the other go to hell? I don't know the answer to that.
So how was that? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you could read it. That's pretty.
That video was really, it just blew my mind because it really highlights how we have opposing views. We have a brain that has two opposing views, and it creates a paradox. And how do we work with that? And basically, paradoxical thinking to me is the way to work with it. Oh, and I'd just like to add one more thing. It's probably a good point to answer the question, what is paradoxical thinking here? So it's thinking that involves holding and exploring seemingly contradictory or opposing ideas. It's like looking at both sides of an argument. And as F. Scott Fitzgerald states, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function.
That's helpful. And we do need to understand this so much. And what I'd like you to expand on is, what is it about this paradoxical thinking that, like you wrote and said, I feel like this is something I want to share with you because I think it might help you in your work. And I'd like to know more about, what is it that about it that you want to keep deepening your work with it, and let others like us know about it, that you feel is so vital for us to better understand.
All right. Well, to start with, I think it uses the whole brain because one of the things that I've learnt is when we're faced with those opposing views, it creates cognitive dissonance in us and it's uncomfortable. So we tend to go to one side or the other. And in the Western world, we favour the left hemisphere's view of the world. That's the dominant view from what I understand. So it's using the whole brain. It's also, for me, it's a source of understanding myself and others because I'm facing the, if you like, the good, the bad, and the ugly of myself, but that actually allows me to understand others. It's also the source of my creativity. And I believe it's worth facing. It is hard to deal with, and it's something we need to learn, but it's essential in being whole. For me, it's a source of all in my life, the great relationships I have with myself and other people. It's just so valuable that I just think, people need to learn about it.
Well, how would you explain what the relevance of paradoxical thinking could have in dealing with both perhaps things like, day-to-day kind of problem solving that we might have, as well as broader challenges that we face, like climate change, like when people say there is no climate change, there is, these things that seem to create such division, or just our day-to-day issues that we confront?
Well, I think in terms of, if I look at relationships between people, it for me, it makes me more aware of my assumptions, and it helps me to break away from those assumptions and create other possible ways to be. So I've created a set of guidelines, guiding principles, if you like, to help me navigate through problems using paradoxical thinking. So I've actually got them here, and I'm just going to quickly go through them. So my 4 guiding principles are: know my intention, know myself, know nothing, and know when I know nothing. So in terms of relationships, I start off with my intention. What's my intention here with this relationship? In terms of myself, it's what are my assumptions about this relationship, this person? And then knowing nothing means that I have to put those assumptions aside so that I can look again, I can inquire, and it creates an open mindset so that other questions can arise and other possible ways of being can arise. And then knowing when I know nothing is what I use to measure if I've achieved that state of knowing nothing. Because when you meet somebody for the first time, it's very exciting. You don't know them. You're open to listening. You're open to really taking them in. So if you could create that state at any time, for example, with my wife, I will do that. And I will look at her and think, who is she? What is she up to? And I can become, she's awesome. It just becomes something that allows me to see her again, with fresh eyes. So I find that very valuable. So the knowing when I know nothing is a measure to know when I've achieved that state. And if I haven't, I have to admit that to myself. In terms of an example, would you like an example of something at work that happened?
Yeah.
So when I was at school, I got to work early and I saw a kind of verbal altercation between 2 staff members. There was Vaughan, who's the business manager of the school, and Margaret, a maths teacher. Margaret's outside trying to get in for the doors, which are the automatic opening doors, and they weren't open yet because too early. Vaughan's on the inside, and he's telling her to stand where the sensor will detect her, but the door hasn't been unlocked. And she's standing there, and he's telling her to stand, and he starts getting a bit loud. And then he realizes he has to open the door, so he unlocks it, and then they open, and she comes in, and they part ways. Now I saw that, and there was a whole lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding. So I went back to my desk, and Margaret, a maths teacher, sat near me, and I could see her. And I thought to myself, in terms of my paradoxical thinking, know my intention. In terms of my intention with regards to people at work and my relationship to people and relationships in general, I want to have good relationships with people. I want them to have good relationships with each other. And I work at building that. So I was faced with, what do I do with what I saw? And then I looked at know myself, and I had an assumption that I wanted to help her in some way. I wanted to go over and see how she was. But my assumption was she was older than me. She might be insulted by me going and saying, are you okay? I had all these assumptions about what might happen. So I put them aside. I did the know nothing part. And I thought, I actually don't know what will happen. And what happens when I go to know nothing, if I don't know, it actually gives me freedom to have a go, is how I say it. And I can start small. In this case, I thought I can just go over and say, how are you? Are you okay? I saw what happened. And if she says, I don't want to talk about it, I'll leave. So I did. And I could feel the freedom. That was the know when I know nothing. I could feel that I was actually free to do that because I was okay about her saying, go away. So I went over to see her and I said, Margaret, I saw what happened downstairs. Are you okay? And she said, fine, and then broke down in tears. and then I just sat there and listened. And she said, I come in early. No one appreciates what I do. And and she just went on, and sorry, because it moves me, because at that point, what I saw that I could really do was acknowledge her, because I knew she was a great maths teacher. And I acknowledged her and I said, I could see the misunderstanding, the miscommunication. You're a great maths teacher. We chatted for a while and then I went back to my desk. Then it dawned on me that I had an assumption about Vaughan. He was seen as a hard-nosed businessman. And I had the thought, will I go and see him? And I thought, no. My assumption was huge. It was like, he's going to think his rank is higher than me. Who am I to go down there and actually see him and talk about it? Again, I saw that was my assumption. I put it aside, got to the know nothing part and thought, well, again, I could just go and say, I saw what happened. Are you okay? And if he says, get out of here, I'll go. So I did. So I went down to him and I said, hi, Vaughan. I saw what happened this morning between you and Margaret. Are you okay? He sat back and looked at me with his kind of glare and went, what's this, some kind of therapy? What's it going to cost me? And I said, look, I can go. It's okay, I'll go. And he said, no. He said, sit down. And he started talking to me and he said, he's been stressed and he's going on about what's going on in his life and he's got all these things just to worry about. I was there for half an hour. I didn't say anything. And at one point he said, maybe you're right. Maybe I was a bit harsh with Margaret. And I hadn't said anything. And then he said, maybe you should talk to Margaret. And I said, I already have. And he said, what did she say? And I said, well, she broke down crying. And he just went, oh. And then we had a bit more of a chat and then I left. And I never followed up to see what happened between them. But the next day, Margaret had left a card on my desk thanking me. Again, it's moving.
It's emotional.
Yeah. And then with Vaughan, we started to have walks and talks at lunchtime and we started to become closer. So there's an example for me and for others, I think, to really see the value of going through that process. Now, I could do the same with climate change if you want. Is there enough time?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely.
All right. Well, in terms of climate change, again, I use my guiding principles. So my view is that there is a problem with climate change. So my problem is, what do I do about it? So my intention is I'd like to do something about it. To know myself is to reveal my assumptions about it. And my assumptions are it's too big for me to do anything about. It's just too overwhelming. So I put that aside. And then in terms of I don't know and have a go, what happens is I look at, well, what could I do? Open mindset again. What's possible? What other possible things I don't have to worry about being, really big and attaching myself to a crane or blocking the railway line. what small thing, where could I start in a small way? And, you know, the results of that is that in my teaching, I put it in the science course material. I look at the governments and their policies to see which ones are actually doing something about climate change. So, you know, I recycle, I buy secondhand clothes. I look at the things that I can do. So that's my response to it. And again, the know when I know nothing, you know, it's all about when I have the freedom to actually do something, even if it's small, and I'm not beating myself up because I'm not doing some major thing. So that's how it works in terms of climate change for me.
Okay, so I mean, I think what I'm hearing from this, and I think your 4 principles are great, which we will need to post more or get them included in the write-up of the video, because it seems like it allows you to open up your own mind to be able to kind of think differently in how you might approach a problem or another person, that you can broaden your view and not just march straight ahead based on assumptions that you have, but in fact to better examine how you're thinking and to be able to put aside assumptions to allow for a more open-minded approach. Is that?
That's true, exactly.
Yeah. And then be able to possibly see the choices in front of you as different, because part of what I understood even from looking at the TED Talks that you sent was that you can wind up getting in a state where you only think you have a binary choice. It's either this or it's that. There is climate change, or people will say, well, no, there's not, there's nothing we can do about it. And so that if you can shift that thinking, you can actually open up to other more interactive discussion and solutions, possibly. Which leads me to even one of the things that I've been personally concerned with, and I'm sure you've heard from what you see about our politics and that people will say, oh, America is very divided. There's so much polarization. And we have this big election coming up, and for people to make some choices. And I think that there are times when people will say, well, it's obviously this, or it's that. I mean, it's either, you're either, I don't even like to mention any individual names, but you're either like just to this side, or what other choices, or how else can I look at this? And I just would love your thoughts on how to use perhaps your principles, but how for any of us to say, how could I even engage with other people where we may be on different sides politically about things, so that we open up some discussion to, it's not just this or that. How can you look at things a little bit more broadly to consider what is at stake in the election? I don't know if that makes sense as a question. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, I think it, you know, in shorthand, again, with my guiding principles, it'll come down to knowing myself. I think it's so important to, you know, the phrase know thyself, really, really important, because that allows you to reveal the assumptions you have. And, you know, they've come from a variety of places and knowledge and information. And the intention really in the end is to have an open mindset so that you can take in information. You need to be able to take in information and stop yourself from attaching yourself to anything in particular. So it's constantly, in some ways, you constantly have to be in doubt and constantly asking questions and looking for reliable information. So know thyself allows you to reveal the assumptions you're working from, and it also gives you the world you see. So I'd say, I would be telling people to be starting with knowing exactly what your assumptions are, and then if you can put them aside so that you can start, you can create an open mindset and start inquiring again. So, and it's about showing people the value of that, I suppose. That's why I've done what I've done in terms of my videos and try to educate people. There's a lot of value in that, because if you can put aside your assumptions, then you can start, well, what happens with paradoxical thinking is you're using both hemispheres' views. It's hard, but you're actually getting a more realistic view of the world. And that's so important in terms of making choices and decisions. So also, if it helps you understand others, so you can start to understand possibly where somebody is against something, what's happening for them, and maybe instead of making them wrong, you might start asking them questions about, why do you think that? Where have you got your information? So it's a shift from the right, wrong way of looking at things to questioning and asking. And also the bottom line is the right hemisphere, which we don't use very much in the Western world. It's about connection and collaboration. It's actually, in terms of Dr. Ian McGilchrist's book, he says it's the master. The left hemisphere is the emissary. So if you admit that as a human, you want connection, I do, I know I do, then maybe it can help you to just stop, allow yourself to not know, and start looking at the person you're talking to and try to connect rather than make them wrong. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that it seems, I once heard a wise doctor talking about something, saying, well, it seems so simple. It's just not easy.
Yeah.
And I think that this issue about more connection, we are in a kind of culture of individualism, like you're supposed to do everything yourself. And the idea of thinking that if you're seeking connection with others or trying to figure out collaboration, that's not, maybe that's part of our, I don't know if that's in the hemispheres of our brain, that one side is more oriented to, I've got to do this myself.
Yeah.
Versus
well, the left hemisphere is actually focused on its self-interest and competition, whereas the right hemisphere has a global view, and the left hemisphere has a targeted view. Maybe I should say why that's the case. Ian McGilchrist talks about it. Our ancient ancestors were roaming around the grasslands and the forests, and they had to keep an eye out for predators while looking for prey. So the right hemisphere is the one that has a global view looking for predators, and the left hemisphere is focused, a targeted view for prey. Now, this also explains why we have a very strong negativity bias, because it's important to look out for predators because it's our survival. So we have a negativity bias, which is, if you get one negative comment, you need at least 3 or 4 positive comments to balance that out. So we need to be aware of that as well. And I think it's important to note that people like in social media, neuromarketing, politicians, campaign managers, they actually are aware of the paradoxical nature of the brain, and they're aware that we hate cognitive dissonance. So they will give us material that's very certain. The left hemisphere likes certainty, so they'll make statements that are certain, even if they're lies sometimes. And that influences people, because most people don't like sitting in that doubt area between the two opposing views, and they don't know what to do with it. So,
the ambiguity of things.
Yes.
So are there any suggestions you have on how we can strengthen our right hemisphere to be more in balance with the left hemisphere? And is that something perhaps we can offer some resources after we complete this?
Well, like I said, I'd recommend his book.
Okay.
Maybe watch my videos as a starting point, and to do some research. I think I know in my education system here, they've tried to include for teachers to teach about ambiguity. Now, it's very hard. I know I've even gone to teachers training college to try to teach teachers. It's very hard when teachers believe they have to know everything. I remember saying to the group of teachers I was talking to, that with a student, it's best if you start off not knowing them. If you can not know them, then your mind is open to, and they freaked out. They said, no, you can't go in not knowing. You have to know. Teachers feel like they have to know everything. So we've got a long way to go, and I think it's got to be talked about more. I think what we're doing now maybe might inspire people to do some research.
Yeah.
The problem is that the left hemisphere is the dominant view, and it actually sees the right hemisphere's view as its competitor, whereas the
Wow.
right hemisphere believes that they can work together. Okay, so I'm doing what I can in terms of trying to educate. It's
This is fascinating, and I hope that this proves to be helpful to people. It certainly has opened my mind to even better understanding that.
right. Yep.
I think that this is really fascinating material. I know I just recently completed reading a book called A General Theory of Love, written by 3 doctors about how our brain, the neurology or the physiology of emotions.
Mm.
And I feel like this is all related, actually.
It is. It is. In my 45 years of study, there's a lot of material out there, and it's all starting to come down to. And I think Dr. Emma Gurkris, who's amazing. There's a lot of YouTube videos on him. He's spent a lot of time. You can see it's like my reference book. He spent a lot of time in finding solid scientific research to back up what he's saying. So him and the people around him are making a big effort to actually educate people. So that's one area that I would point people to. If you just do some Google, YouTube searches on him, you'll understand and see. And he's a really good speaker as well. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we will follow up with this to see what we can do to build on this discussion and open people up to more of these ideas, because I think that it's not a moment too soon.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to comment on that I haven't specifically asked you for that?
Well, yes. I think we have a view that life is linear and logical, whereas I think it's helical, as in like the DNA, and paradoxical. And just to underline that, I want to just show you a short video, which, yep, so I'll just find that first. Okay, I'll just share that. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is our solar system. Now, so I said, I think life is paradoxical and helical.
Wow.
When you consider that we're actually moving through space, and in nature, there's hang on, I'll just stop sharing. If you look to nature, you'll see the helical pattern everywhere. So just to leave people with that, think about life being helical and paradoxical, not linear and logical.
I like that. I think that's a good place to say thank you so much for this.
My pleasure.